It's the Sal and Rich Show. We're back, part two. So we started to have offline conversation, and we thought after a few minutes, it was like, this stuff is really interesting. We shouldn't have stopped. So Fran was nice enough to stick around a little bit longer and continue the conversation with us. So nobody does a part two, right? Sebastian and Pete, nobody does part two. We're breaking new ground here with part two. So I'm going to we're also having mic issues. So I'm going to put the mic over in the middle here so we can share the mic.
There you go. So, what we had discussed was, after we finished the first podcast, your time in the Marine Corps. Tell us a little bit about that. You joined college.
Yeah, it's. I think I pretty much caught up with the guys that I hung out with from the track team, some football players, guys that were in a PLC program, Rich, who they would go down the summer of their sophomore year and come back and then finish up after junior year. I didn't want to do any of that, but so anyway, they pretty much sold me on the whole OCS program, and I thought it was a good idea. I was interested in what the program had to offer. I thought that would be a good opportunity to the Marine Corps headquarters was in Quantico, and they were certainly talking about possibly making their track team. And, you know, as a 21-year-old kid, I don't consider myself an adult at 21, but I didn't then. So I said, yeah, sure, that sounds good. So I went down.
And this was at the end of Vietnam.
Oh yeah. Vietnam. So this was summer of '75. Vietnam fell to the communists the end of April 30. Excuse me, '75, and excuse me again. Also, we had a problem in May. I went in June. May, there was a tragedy. It's called the Mayaguez incident, which group of Marines were sent in to rescue some civilians who had been captured by the Khmer Rouge. And see, the problem was then that because of Vietnam, where and again, this is, some people might not agree with this, but we weren't allowed to fight in Vietnam as we could have. So the country's administration was calling all the shots. So everything had to be approved by President Ford. And here are these Marines, and this is what I was taught when I was there. Here are these Marines on Mayaguez was a ship that was captured. They're down there and they're waiting for orders. The whole thing with the Marine Corps is, Marine Corps is a surprise. Right. Go in there, take what you need to take, and get out. Yeah. So they're sitting there on this island waiting for orders, and that gave the enemy time, and in short, it was a fiasco. A lot of guys lost their lives, and it was a big mess. Yeah. So when I was there in the summer, everybody was kind of pissed off, all the people running the show. And it was tough that way, and a lot of guys I was in with were not right out of college, and I wasn't prepared for that. But I picked up from them. A lot of them, many of them were enlisted guys who were selected for commissions, and some of these guys had been to Vietnam 2 and 3 times. So it was, I was kind of like a fish out of water for a long time. Yeah.
So talk a little bit about when you got enlisted and you went to Quantico for your first gig, what they did as far as waking you guys up. And I think it starts at 10 o'clock at night. They take you down there. Go through that. That was interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, many of the listeners, I'm sure, were in the military and went through the same thing. So, not to tell the same old stories, but it was interesting. It was a mental thing with officer training, and more so. I'm sorry, I got it mixed up. was more of a physical thing with the officers, and it was tougher mentally for the enlisted guys. But yeah, you get down there around 10 o'clock at night, and you get all your gear, and then you go in the barracks, and eventually you're not called a bed, it's called a sack. You're in the sack, and lo and behold, around 3:30, your drill instructor comes in and starts to throw metal trash cans up against the cement wall, and it was welcome to the Marines.
Right.
So, what was the reaction from your mom and dad? You went home and said, "Mom and Dad, I'm joining the Marine Corps."
Yeah,
What was that like?
They weren't real happy. Just my dad didn't say much, but I knew he wasn't happy about it. He thought I should go out and get a job, but anyway, long story short, it worked out.
But you also, if I remember correctly, when we were talking, when they had the lottery going. Remember we talked? Yeah, we talked about the lottery, and I think it was in '73 when my number came up like 360. Rich was high up. Yours was 32, right?
32, yeah.
Yeah, and I knew Chick Schaefer. His number was in the top 10, so he knew he was going. I think he enlisted, if I remember correctly. What was that all about? How did that feel? And how did you work around all that, realizing that you number 32, you're going to go?
Well, I was a freshman in college, so it was a totally different animal, and I get a letter from the Marine Corps. I had no interest in it at the time, and they say, "Congratulations, you won the lottery," which I didn't think was too funny at the time. It's funny now.
Yeah, there's such a
Yeah. So, the Army sent a letter. You report to Camden, downtown Camden, for your physical, and I ran into Mike Coyle. You guys remember Mike?
Yeah.
And Mike and I, went through, got the physical together, and say what you will about Nixon, but he ended the draft, and he was my biggest hero at the time. I was very glad, so I was able to finish college and get on with things.
Yeah. That was we all went through that, and I remember everybody was just a nervous wreck. My parents, that day they did the lottery, I think it was on TV. Everybody was watching, and my mother and father were like really, really concerned. I was a sophomore in college at the time. I went to Rutgers in Camden, and I remember some of the conversation. My mother was like, "We're going to go to Canada. I don't want you to go." I was like, "Yeah, right. I'm going to Canada. That's not going to happen." So, but thank God my number was real high, so I didn't have to worry about it. But it was scary. And then Vietnam was one of those wars, as you well know, is that it was a war that we really didn't try to win. And we were some parts of the military had their hands tied behind their back. You were talking about. I've got a different part of this story which is kind of interesting, and it's Patty's cousin. There was a separate war going on in Cambodia. Everybody knows that now, and in fact, it was revealed later. But there were guys that they recruited to go and fight in Cambodia, and these guys were. There's a book called The Ravens, and that's what they were called, the Ravens. And I forget how many guys were there, but Patty's cousin was one of the guys that did flyovers and did reconnaissance, and then once he found out where the bad guys were, then they go in and bomb them. And they trained these guys, and they wanted them to specifically be, quote, cowboys. They didn't want them to be, military. They wanted them to be out-of-the-box guys. And so his first flight, he gets shot down and gets killed. And he's in the book. His name is in the book. And what happens is the guys got so pissed off that they lost one guy already, they went in and strafed it down, and that's just what you did. It's in the book, unfortunately. The other sad part of the story is they never found any of Patty's cousin's remains, and so they sent something back to her aunt, and right, honey, it wasn't anything that was his. I mean, yeah.
There was nothing in it that was John.
Yeah, they didn't recognize anything because it wasn't his, and they're like looking at the shoe size, and it's
Nothing
just
in the footlocker?
nothing in the footlocker. No, nothing. So, yeah, that's a part of the war that nobody talks about. But thankfully, there are some books out there. If you're interested in it, there's something on YouTube with the Ravens. If you want to watch it, it's interesting. The book itself is very interesting too.
Fran, you mentioned, but we weren't allowed to fight in Vietnam. You sort of alluded to that, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was taught.
Yeah.
You know, where I was, that was the lesson that was basically taught.
And there is a book out there called The Class of '66. It was written by a graduate of West Point, and that was their complaint. We couldn't fight the war. It was all being managed by Washington. And so one of the questions I asked after we shut down the last interview was, how did the Marine Corps leave you as a person before and after?
Well, again, in my short time there, I thought it was well worth it, and you know, it's just a discipline that, and again, many probably listeners know what I'm talking about, but it's invaluable. You take it through the rest of your life with you. I mean, we've got guys right from Paul Six, Johnny Bottle was 30-year colonel. You know, it's just unbelievable the service that many of you out there put in. But I thought it was very worthwhile. The everyday.
You learned things that just helped you in your life, right? I mean, like you said, you became a teacher, and there were probably some things that you learned in the Marine, even though you were a short time, that helped you get through, crisis, whatever,
Yeah. My wife Susan likes to tease me about the hot days in the classroom before air conditioning, where I used to wear a suit and tie and never loosen the tie, and I would say, well, that's to show my students you got to put up with it.
right? That's
They thought I was a weirdo, I guess. But,
Well, that's OLG and Paul Six.
yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah, the nuns too. Nuns too. But,
Yeah.
so
Well,
it's
I
a bit
believe
crazy.
that my 8th grade nun was in the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
Because she used to throw trash cans against the wall. She did.
Did she really?
She was like 4'2", but she was tough.
Is this Sister
Yeah.
Malachi? That was
No, it was Sister Perpetua. Pauline or something.
We had a few. Yeah.
Yeah, we've all had our. I'll tell you my story with the nuns. We're getting off track, but that's okay. So first grade, Brooklyn, New York. I guess I'm 6, and we get to class, and my nun is Sister Aloysius, Mary Aloysius, and she at the time, I mean, to me, she looked like she was about 95, but she was tough, and so we get into class. And I didn't go to kindergarten. I didn't know anything about any of this stuff. And so there's Palmer method, how do you spell your name, right? So she's going around the classroom. She's like, why don't you everybody go up the board, spell your name. I'm like, I didn't know how to do that. My parents didn't teach me that. Well, she got so pissed off at me. She wrapped my knuckles, and then she'd drag me by my hair and take me back to my seat. You're going to learn this, by the time you come back tomorrow, right? So I go home and I'm crying to my dad. And I said, she's dragging me around the room pulling my hair. My father says, well, we'll take care of that. And takes me down to the barbershop, gets me a crew cut. So the next day, Sister Mary Aloysius is pissed off because she can't drag me around, but she's still wrapping my knuckles, And I finally learned how to write my name, Palmer method.
One last story about a nun. It was about 2005, 2004, and our classmate, Jack Navickas, was retired, was sick, and he used to drive our 8th grade nun around in the car. And she was retired, and she was probably, I don't know, 4'5" or something, about 100 pounds. And she used to beat the living hell, yell at kids. They pulled into the church parking lot, and the CCD program had been taken over by lay teachers. Mm-hmm. And they're in the parking lot. The kids were acting up, and Jack whispered over to her, don't you wish you could beat these kids one more time? And her reply was in her Irish accent, I do. Just one more time.
That is classic. Oh, my God, I love it. Anything else you want to cover?
That's it, man. That was great.
Yeah, we just wanted to come back because there was a couple of things that were really interesting that Fran covered. So, again, part 2, we'll post this up, and you guys can watch it. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Fran. Yeah, and then you want to...
Great.
Sal and Rich show. Yeah, you got a poster. All right, folks. We're going to close it out. Hit your camera.
Yeah, that's what you see online, right?
Did you have a military phone? Yeah, that would have been good.
There you go.